When Judge Keller laughed at Marcus Wilkins, a black veteran with a limp representing himself in court against a huge development company, nobody thought Marcus stood a chance. The judge mocked him, asking if he had any legal training whatsoever, while the expensive lawyers from Westfield smirked at their easy victory. What Judge Keller didn't know was that beneath Marcus's simple suit and quiet demeanor lay a secret that would shock the entire courtroom. As Westfield tried to steal part of his property and destroy the community garden he'd built for his neighborhood, Marcus was about to reveal a surprising legal talent that would not only save his home, but expose corruption that reached all the way to the judge's bench. Nobody believed in Marcus at first, except for his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Talbot, and a growing group of community members. But as Marcus began questioning witnesses with unexpected skill, people started to wonder, who is this veteran really? And why did the powerful judge underestimate him so badly? Marcus Wilkins sat in the back row of Courtroom 7, his fingers tapping nervously on his worn leather briefcase. The wooden bench felt hard under him, but that was nothing compared to the knot in his stomach. All around him, people in fancy suits talked in quiet voices, looking like they belonged here. Marcus tugged at his own suit jacket, which hung a bit loose on his frame. He'd lost weight these past few months from all the stress. "You got this," he whispered to himself. "You got this." 20 years in the Marines had taught Marcus how to stay calm in scary situations. He'd faced gunfire in Afghanistan and Iraq. He'd led men through danger and brought them home safe. But somehow, this courtroom made his heart pound harder than any battlefield ever did. A sharp pain shot through his right leg, and Marcus shifted position to ease the pressure. The old combat injury never let him forget what he'd sacrificed for his country. He rubbed his thigh and took a deep breath, looking over the notes he'd prepared for today. All rise. The Honorable Judge Raymond Keller presiding. Marcus stood, with everyone else, wincing slightly at the pain in his leg. He watched as Judge Keller swept into the courtroom wearing his black robe. The judge's face looked hard and bored at the same time. Marcus had heard stories about Judge Keller, none of them good. People said he was tough, impatient, and didn't like anyone wasting his time. "Be seated," Judge Keller said, not even looking up as he shuffled through papers on his bench. Marcus sat back down, still clutching his notes. He scanned the courtroom again, his eyes landing on the table where 3 lawyers from Westfield Development Company sat. Their suits probably cost more than his entire wardrobe. They had shiny watches, leather portfolios, and the confident smiles of people who never lost. Case number 47293, Westfield Development Company versus Marcus Wilkins, the court clerk announced. This was it. Marcus gathered his papers and stood up. He tried not to limp as he made his way to the front of the courtroom, but the pain in his leg was acting up today. By the time he reached the defendant's table, he was gritting his teeth. The head lawyer from Westfield, a tall man with perfectly styled gray hair, gave Marcus a small nod, the kind you might give to a child who's about to learn a hard lesson. "Counselor James Roberts, representing Westfield Development Company, Your Honor," the lawyer said in a smooth voice. "With me are my associates, Ms. Chen and Mr. Donovan." Judge Keller nodded at them with familiar ease. "Good morning, Counselor Roberts. I see Westfield is well represented as always." Then the judge turned his gaze to Marcus. His eyebrows rose slightly. "And you are Mr. Wilkins, I presume? Where is your attorney?" Marcus stood as straight as his leg would allow. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." There was a pause. Then Judge Keller did something that made Marcus's face burn with shame. He laughed, not loudly, but a clear chuckle that echoed in the quiet courtroom. "You're representing yourself? Against Westfield?" Judge Keller looked at the three corporate lawyers who were smiling behind their hands. "Mr. Wilkins, do you have any legal training whatsoever?" "No, Your Honor, but I've been studying the—" "Studying?" Judge Keller interrupted. "Mr. Wilkins, this isn't a book club. This is a court of law. These attorneys," he gestured toward the Westfield team, "have years of specialized education and experience. They handle cases like this every day." Marcus felt every eye in the courtroom on him. His palms were sweaty, and the pain in his leg seemed to throb with each beat of his embarrassed heart. But he stood his ground. "I understand that, Your Honor, but I believe I can—" "Do you know how many self-represented litigants I see in this courtroom, Mr. Wilkins?" Judge Keller leaned forward. "Many. Do you know how many succeed against corporate legal teams? Virtually none." From the corner of his eye, Marcus could see Mr. Roberts smirking at his colleagues. The message was clear. This case was already won. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt, "I have the right to represent myself." "Indeed you do," Judge Keller replied with a dramatic sigh. "You also have the right to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops, but I wouldn't recommend it." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the courtroom. Judge Keller looked at Marcus's limping gait and the simple, slightly large suit he wore. His eyes lingered on the worn briefcase and the handwritten notes. His expression was a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Mr. Wilkins, I see from your file that you're a veteran?" "Yes, sir. Marine Corps, 20 years. Retired as a master sergeant." For a moment, something like respect flickered across Judge Keller's face, but it quickly disappeared. "Well, Master Sergeant," he said, emphasizing the military title with a hint of mockery. "The battlefield and the courtroom are very different places. Different rules, different strategies." He tapped his gavel lightly on the bench. "Different outcomes." Marcus felt his face grow hot. He knew what the judge was doing, trying to make him feel small, out of place. It was working, but Marcus hadn't survived 3 combat tours by backing down when things got tough. "I believe in justice, Your Honor," Marcus said simply. Judge Keller actually rolled his eyes. "Well, belief won't win this case, but let's proceed. We'll see what you've got." He looked at his watch. "Though please try not to waste the court's time." Mr. Roberts stood. "Your Honor, given the circumstances, perhaps we could offer Mr. Wilkins one final chance to settle this matter before proceeding. Westfield has been more than generous in their offer." "That seems reasonable," Judge Keller nodded, looking at Marcus like he was throwing him a life preserver. "Mr. Wilkins, I strongly suggest you consider their offer." Marcus thought about his home, the only thing he'd ever truly owned. The garden where neighborhood kids learned to grow vegetables, the shade tree where old Mrs. Talbot liked to sit in the summer, the small back porch where he'd finally found some peace after years of war. "Thank you, Your Honor, but I must decline," Marcus said. "I'm prepared to proceed." Judge Keller's face hardened. "Very well. Counselor Roberts, please present your opening statement." As Roberts stood and buttoned his expensive suit jacket, he gave Marcus a look that said, "Poor fool." "Your Honor," Roberts began in a confident voice, "this case is quite straightforward. Westfield Development Company has clear documentation showing that a portion of the property currently occupied by Mr. Wilkins, specifically the southwestern corner including the garden area, legally belongs to Westfield according to proper surveys and historical property records." As the lawyer continued, using big words and legal terms that sounded like a foreign language, Marcus saw Judge Keller nodding along. The judge was already convinced. The 3 lawyers looked polished and prepared, with color-coded folders, digital presentations ready to go, and the easy confidence of people who knew they would win. Looking down at his own handwritten notes, Marcus felt doubt creep in for the first time. What was he thinking? He was just a retired Marine with a bad leg and a stubborn streak. These people ate guys like him for breakfast. But then he remembered why he was here. This wasn't just about a piece of land. It was about right and wrong. It was about standing up to bullies, even when they wore expensive suits and had fancy titles. Marcus straightened his shoulders, the way he used to when inspecting his troops. He might not know all the legal terms. He might not have gone to fancy schools. But he knew truth when he saw it, and he knew how to fight for what mattered. As Roberts finished his opening statement, Judge Keller turned to Marcus with an expression that clearly expected little. "Your opening statement, Mr. Wilkins, try to keep it brief." Marcus stood up, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. He took a deep breath. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "I'm ready." Marcus began his opening statement, his voice growing stronger with each word. Though he stumbled over a few legal terms, he spoke clearly about the boundaries of his property and his rights as a homeowner. Judge Keller checked his watch twice during the short speech. When Marcus finished, the judge quickly adjourned for the day, scheduling testimony to begin the following morning. The courtroom emptied quickly. Marcus gathered his papers with shaking hands. The first day had gone exactly as he'd feared, humiliating and discouraging. Mr. Roberts approached as Marcus was packing up his briefcase. "That offer to settle is still on the table, Mr. Wilkins," Roberts said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I suggest you take it. Today was just a taste of what's coming." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "Thank you for your concern, Counselor. I'll see you tomorrow." Outside, dark clouds had gathered, matching Marcus's mood. He limped down the courthouse steps as rain began to fall, soaking through his suit jacket before he reached the bus stop. By the time the bus dropped him off in his neighborhood, he was wet, cold, and completely drained. His modest house looked welcoming despite everything. It wasn't fancy, just a small two-bedroom with peeling paint in some spots. But it was his. Every nail he'd hammered, every board he'd replaced, every flower he'd planted represented freedom and peace after years of following orders and living in danger. Marcus unlocked his front door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar smell of home. He hung his wet suit to dry and changed into dry clothes. His leg throbbed from standing so long in court. He took some pain medicine and sat heavily at his kitchen table, spreading out his soaked notes. Some of the ink had run, making parts unreadable. "Great," he muttered. "Just great." His eyes drifted to the photo on the wall. His parents standing proudly in front of this very house 30 years ago. They had worked hard their whole lives, but never owned much. This house had been their only real possession, their piece of the American dream. When they died 4 years ago, just months apart, the house came to Marcus while he was still serving overseas. "I'm trying, Mom and Dad," he whispered to the photo. "I'm really trying." Marcus made himself a simple dinner of soup and crackers. As he ate, his mind drifted back to how this all started. After retiring from the Marines with honors and a Purple Heart, Marcus had come home to find the neighborhood changing. Many old houses stood empty or had been torn down. New construction was springing up. Fancy condos and shops that the original residents could never afford. Marcus used every penny of his savings and military pension to fix up his parents' house. He replaced the roof, fixed the plumbing, and painted the exterior. The biggest project was the backyard. What had once been patchy grass became a thriving garden with vegetables, flowers, and a big shade tree where neighbors gathered on hot summer evenings. Old Mrs. Talbot from next door brought her grandchildren over to learn about growing tomatoes. The Johnson kids from down the street helped weed the beans and peas. Single mom Diana from across the way took home fresh vegetables every week to help feed her 3 kids. The garden became the heart of what remained of the old community. Then Westfield Development arrived with their plans to revitalize the area. One by one, Marcus's neighbors sold their homes, unable to resist the money being offered. Some were happy to go. Others felt they had no choice, especially after strange things started happening. Unexpected tax increases, sudden code violations, minor vandalism. Marcus refused every offer. The house wasn't just property to him. It was his heritage, his stability, his contribution to the neighborhood. He wanted to honor his parents by keeping their home alive and vibrant. Westfield's offers turned to threats. The company representative, a smooth-talking man named Victor, made it clear that Marcus would regret not selling the easy way. Soon after, the problems began. First, it was small things. Garbage dumped in his yard, mailbox knocked over. Then, someone broke his front windows. The police took reports, but nothing came of them. Next came the building inspectors, finding violations that had never been issues before. The property taxes mysteriously doubled in a single year. The worst blow came 3 months ago. Marcus received notice of Westfield's lawsuit claiming that part of his property, including most of his beloved garden, actually belonged to them, according to newly discovered historical property documents. They demanded he remove his garden and fence immediately or face steep daily fines. Marcus had visited the county records office himself and found nothing supporting their claim. But fighting Westfield meant fighting their army of lawyers, their connections, their money, and apparently even Judge Keller himself. A loud knock at the door interrupted Marcus's thoughts. He limped over to find Mrs. Talbot standing there with a covered dish. "Thought you might need some real food after your day in court," she said, pushing past him into the kitchen. At 78, Harriet Talbot moved with the energy of someone 20 years younger. Her silver hair was always neatly styled, and today she wore a bright yellow raincoat against the weather. "How did you know I was in court?" Marcus asked, taking the dish of what smelled like chicken casserole. Diana's cousin works as a clerk there. News travels fast. Mrs. Talbot took off her raincoat and hung it up like she owned the place. "She said that judge made a fool of himself, laughing at you like that." Marcus sighed, putting the casserole on the counter. "He wasn't wrong, though. I'm in way over my head, Mrs. T." "Nonsense," she said firmly, sitting at his kitchen table and examining his soggy notes. "From what I hear, you held your own just fine. Now sit down and tell me everything while you eat some real food." Marcus knew better than to argue with Mrs. Talbot. He ate while describing the day's events. She listened carefully, asking smart questions that showed she understood more than he expected. "I worked as a legal secretary for 42 years before retiring," she explained when he commented on her knowledge. "Worked for the same law firm my whole career. Best education a person can get is watching lawyers work day in and day out." She picked up one of his damp notes. "Your organization needs work, though. You need to separate your arguments clearly. Keep your evidence in order." "I had a system," Marcus said defensively. "Before the rain ruined it," Mrs. Talbot snorted. "Not much of a system from what I can see. Here's what we'll do. I'll help you organize these notes properly. You focus on remembering all that legal reading you've been doing." Marcus looked at her in surprise. "How did you know about that? You think I don't see you carrying those law books from the library? Or staying up late with your little desk? Lamp on?" This house isn't exactly Fort Knox, you know. I can see right through your kitchen window from my bedroom." Marcus laughed for the first time that day. "Mrs. T, are you spying on me?" "Neighborhood watch," she corrected primly. "Now tell me, what exactly have you been studying all these months?" Marcus hesitated, then went to his bedroom. He returned with a stack of notebooks filled with careful handwriting. "Property law mostly, contract law, civil procedure. I've been taking notes from every book I could find." Mrs. Talbot flipped through the notebooks, her eyebrows rising. "This is thorough." She looked up at him. "But why? Why not just hire a lawyer?" Marcus sat down heavily. "Can't afford one good, enough to beat Westfield. And honestly, this isn't the first time I've studied law." "What do you mean?" Marcus stared at the photo of his parents. "When I was recovering from this," he gestured to his injured leg, "I spent 6 months in the hospital. Had nothing but time on my hands. Started reading law books to keep my mind busy. Found out I had a knack for it." "So what's the plan for tomorrow?" Mrs. Talbot asked, pushing aside the empty casserole dish. "Tomorrow they bring in their so-called expert to testify about the property line," Marcus said. "I need to be ready to question him." Mrs. Talbot stood up decisively. "Well then, we better get to work. I'll make coffee." As the rain continued to fall outside, Marcus and Mrs. Talbot spread his notes across the kitchen table, creating a new system for organizing his case. For the first time since receiving Westfield's lawsuit, Marcus felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't fighting this battle alone after all. Morning came too quickly. Marcus woke before his alarm, his mind already racing with everything he needed to remember for court. His leg felt better after a night's rest, but anxiety twisted his stomach into knots. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted through the house. Confused, Marcus pulled on his robe and limped to the kitchen. There stood Mrs. Talbot at his stove, flipping pancakes. "Morning, soldier," she said cheerfully. "Breakfast is almost ready." "Mrs. T, did you break into my house?" Marcus asked, blinking in surprise. She waved a spatula at him. "You gave me a key last year when you fixed my water heater, remember? For emergencies?" She flipped a pancake with expert precision. "I'd say court day qualifies as an emergency." Marcus couldn't argue with that logic. He sat at the table where Mrs. Talbot had already laid out his notes in neatly labeled folders, color-coded with tabs. "Eat," she commanded, setting a plate in front of him. "Then shower and put on that blue tie instead of the brown one you wore yesterday. Blue says trustworthy." Marcus ate obediently while Mrs. Talbot quizzed him on property law questions. Her knowledge surprised him. "How do you know all this?" he asked between bites. "Told you, I was a legal secretary for 42 years. You pick things up?" She sipped her coffee. "Plus, I might have borrowed some of your law books when you weren't looking." After breakfast, Marcus dressed in his freshly ironed suit, with the blue tie as instructed. When he emerged from his bedroom, Mrs. Talbot nodded approvingly. "Much better. Now you look like someone who knows what he's doing." "Even if I don't feel like it," Marcus admitted. "Fake it till you make it," Mrs. Talbot said firmly. "That's what all the lawyers I knew did." As they drove to the courthouse in Mrs. Talbot's ancient Buick, Marcus reviewed his notes one last time. They were organized beautifully now, with clear sections for each argument and piece of evidence. "Tell me more about what you studied while you were in the Marines," Mrs. Talbot said as she navigated the morning traffic. "Sikadine, Diana's cousin said you mentioned taking courses?" Marcus nodded, his eyes still on his notes. "While other guys played cards or video games in their free time, I took online classes. Always liked learning, even as a kid." "What kind of classes?" all sorts. History, literature, science, some basic law courses too. Marcus closed his folder. Then, after I got hurt on my third tour, I had all that time in the hospital, read everything I could get my hands on about property and contract law. Why those subjects specifically? Marcus was quiet for a moment. My parents almost lost this house once when I was a teenager. A developer tried a similar trick back then, claiming our property line was wrong. Dad didn't understand all the legal stuff, nearly gave up. But our neighbor at the time, Mr. Dennison, had been a paralegal. He helped Dad fight it. He looked out the window at the passing city. I remember thinking how powerful knowledge was, how it could be the difference between keeping your home and losing everything. Mrs. Talbot glanced at him knowingly. So you prepared yourself, just in case. Something like that, Marcus said. Never thought I'd actually need it. They arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. As they walked up the steps, Marcus moving more easily today with less pain, a young reporter approached them. Mr. Wilkins, I'm Zoe Washington from the City Tribune. Could I ask you a few questions about your case against Westfield Development? Marcus looked surprised. How did you hear about this case? We follow all of Westfield's projects, she explained. They're reshaping the entire city. When we heard a single homeowner was fighting them in court and representing himself, well, that's a story people care about. Before Marcus could reply, he spotted the Westfield lawyers arriving, looking annoyed at the sight of the reporter. No comment for now, Marcus told Zoe politely. Maybe after today's session. Inside the courtroom, more people filled the benches than yesterday. Marcus recognized several faces from his neighborhood. Diana from across the street waved discreetly. The Johnson family sat in the back row. Even Mr. Chen from the corner grocery store had come. Words getting around, Mrs. Talbot whispered as they took their seats. People are rooting for you. Marcus felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. Judge Keller entered, looking slightly less dismissive than yesterday when he spotted the fuller courtroom and the reporter taking notes in the back. Westfield Development versus Wilkins. Day 2, the judge announced. Counselor Roberts, call your first witness. Roberts stood and buttoned his suit jacket. Westfield calls Dr. Edward Harrington, property surveyor and historical land specialist. A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses took the stand. After being sworn in, Dr. Harrington began describing his impressive credentials: 3 degrees, 20 years of experience, numerous publications. Roberts guided him through a series of questions about Westfield's claim to part of Marcus's property. Based on historical documents we've uncovered, Dr. Harrington stated confidently, the original property line clearly places the southwestern portion of Mr. Wilkins's current yard, approximately 15 feet by 30 feet, within Westfield's legal boundaries. Roberts displayed sophisticated digital maps on a large screen, showing overlays of what he claimed were original property lines versus current ones. The presentation looked professional and convincing. No further questions, Your Honor. Roberts, said smugly, returning to his seat. Judge Keller turned to Marcus. Your cross-examination, Mr. Wilkins? Marcus stood, feeling every eye in the courtroom on him. Yesterday's humiliation still stung, but today he had a plan. Thank you, Your Honor. He approached the witness stand with his organized folders. Dr. Harrington, could you please tell the court when you personally visited my property to conduct your survey? Dr. Harrington blinked. I didn't personally visit. I analyzed the documents and existing survey data provided by Westfield. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So you've never actually seen my property in person? That wasn't necessary for my analysis. I see. Marcus opened one of his folders. And these historical documents you mentioned, could you name them specifically? Certainly. We recovered the Williams County Land Grant of 1923 and the Mason Street Redistricting Map of 1947, both of which clearly show objection, Marcus said calmly. The witness is testifying to documents not entered into evidence. Judge Keller looked startled. It was a proper legal objection, stated correctly. Sustained, he said after a moment, eyeing Marcus with new curiosity. Counselor Roberts, please enter these documents properly if you wish the witness to refer to them. Roberts looked annoyed as he scrambled to organize the documents. Meanwhile, Marcus continued. Dr. Harrington, are you familiar with the Boundary Stake Act of 1952, which requires physical boundary markers to be placed and recorded for all properties in Williams County? The witness hesitated. I'm aware of it generally, yes. And are you aware that according to that act, physical boundary markers take precedence over paper maps when there's a discrepancy? Roberts stood quickly. Objection. Mr. Wilkins is testifying, not questioning. I'm simply establishing the witness's knowledge of relevant law, Marcus replied evenly. Judge Keller seemed torn, but finally said, overruled. The witness may answer. Yes, physical markers can be considered, Dr. Harrington admitted reluctantly. Marcus pulled out a plastic bag containing 3 metal stakes, rusted with age. Would these be examples of such markers? They appear to be, yes. These were buried 6 inches underground at the corners of my property, Marcus explained. I discovered them while gardening last year. The dates stamped on them match the 1952 Act requirements. I've had them verified by an independent surveyor. He handed the bag to the court clerk, along with a notarized letter from the surveyor. I'd like to enter these as evidence, Your Honor. Judge Keller's eyebrows rose as he examined the stakes. Accepted, Roberts whispered urgently to his colleagues. This was clearly not going according to their plan. One final question, Dr. Harrington, Marcus said. If these boundary stakes were placed according to the 1952 Act and have remained undisturbed since then, would they legally define my property line regardless of any paper maps Westfield might have found? The witness looked uncomfortable. Technically, yes, but thank you. No further questions, Your Honor. As Marcus returned to his seat, he noticed the stunned expressions on the faces of the Westfield lawyers. Judge Keller was looking at him with what appeared to be grudging respect. During the lunch recess, Marcus and Mrs. Talbot sat on a bench outside the courthouse, eating sandwiches she had packed. Where did you learn to cross-examine like that? She asked, clearly impressed. Marcus shrugged. Watched a lot of Law and Order. She swatted his arm. Don't you lie to me, Marcus Wilkins. That was professional-level questioning in there. Before he could respond, Zoe, the reporter, approached again. Mr. Wilkins? That was quite a performance. Would you say Judge Keller underestimated you? Marcus considered the question. Everyone underestimates someone at some point, Ms. Washington. Sometimes it works to your advantage. Across the street, Marcus spotted Judge Keller leaving an expensive restaurant with a well-dressed man. The judge laughed at something the man said, clapping him on the shoulder with obvious familiarity. Who's that with Judge Keller? Marcus asked Zoe. She followed his gaze. That's Richard Maxwell, CEO of Westfield Development. They're old friends from college, I believe. Mrs. Talbot and Marcus exchanged concerned looks. If the judge was friends with Westfield's CEO, that explained his bias and made winning this case even harder than Marcus had thought. But as they returned to the courtroom for the afternoon session, Marcus walked with new confidence. The judge and Westfield might have connections and power, but Marcus had something they hadn't counted on. Knowledge, determination, and now a community behind him. The afternoon session began with Westfield's lawyers looking noticeably less confident. Roberts called his second witness, a city planner named Thomas Green, who testified about the tremendous benefits Westfield's development would bring to the neighborhood. Property values will increase by an estimated 30%, Green explained, gesturing to colorful charts. New businesses will create jobs. The area will be transformed from declining to thriving. And what about current residents? Roberts asked. How will they benefit? Those who choose to stay will enjoy improved infrastructure, reduced crime, and a higher quality of life, Green answered smoothly. Judge Keller nodded approvingly at this testimony, occasionally glancing at his watch. When Roberts finished his questioning, he turned to Marcus with an impatient expression. Your cross-examination, Mr. Wilkins. Please be brief. Marcus approached the witness stand calmly. Mr. Green, you mentioned property values increasing. What happens to property taxes when values go up? Green shifted uncomfortably. They typically increase proportionally. By 30% in Phoebe Hunim. This case? Marcus pressed. Approximately, yes. And what percentage of current residents in my neighborhood live on fixed incomes, like pensions or Social Security? I don't have those exact figures. Marcus opened one of his folders. According to the city's own demographic study from last year, it's 64%, almost two-thirds. He looked up at Green. How will seniors like Mrs. Talbot benefit from tax increases they can't afford? Green had no good answer. Marcus continued methodically. You mentioned new businesses creating jobs. What's the average starting wage for these positions? I believe around $12 an hour. And what's the current average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Westfield's other developments? Green hesitated. About $1,400 per month. Marcus did the quick math aloud. So, someone working full-time at one of these new jobs would spend more than half their income just on rent, correct? As Marcus continued his questioning, the court heard a different story than Westfield had presented. The tremendous benefits seemed less beneficial for the people actually living in the neighborhood. When Marcus finished, Judge Keller looked thoughtful. He was still clearly favoring Westfield, but Marcus had planted seeds of doubt. After a short recess, Roberts called their final witness of the day, a real estate appraiser who testified that Marcus's property was significantly below neighborhood standards and negatively impacted surrounding property values. The garden area in particular is problematic, the appraiser said, displaying photos that made Marcus's beautiful garden look like an overgrown mess. It's unsightly and attracts pests. Marcus realized the photos had been taken right after a storm, when wind had knocked over plants and scattered debris. It was a deliberately misleading representation. During cross-examination, Marcus asked the appraiser about his relationship with Westfield. Have you done other appraisals for Westfield development before this one? A few, yes. How many is a few? The appraiser looked uncomfortable. Perhaps 20 or 30 over the past few years. And Westfield pays you well for these appraisals? Standard. Industry rates, Marcus nodded. I see. And did you happen to take these photographs of my property yourself? No, they were provided to me. By Westfield? Yes. Did you visit my property in person before making your assessment? The appraiser hesitated. No, I based my assessment on the photographs and comparable properties in the area. Marcus pulled out his phone. Your Honor, I'd like to enter new evidence. These are photographs of my garden taken this morning. He handed his phone to the clerk, who connected it to the courtroom display. Where Westfield's photos showed a messy, overgrown space, Marcus's showed neat rows of vegetables, flowering plants attracting butterflies, and a well-maintained seating area where children could learn about gardening. A murmur went through the courtroom as people saw the truth. Judge Keller leaned forward, comparing the two sets of images with narrowed eyes. Furthermore, Marcus C. continued, I have statements from Neighborhood Watch indicating that property crime has decreased by 20% on my block since the community garden was established. He submitted a folder of signed statements. Far from being a problem, the garden has become a community asset. By the time Marcus finished his cross-examination, the appraiser's testimony had been thoroughly discredited. Even Judge Keller looked skeptical of Westfield's claims. As the day's session ended, Marcus could hear excited whispers behind him. The spectators section had grown even more crowded throughout the afternoon. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, Judge Keller announced. Mr. Roberts, I assume you have more witnesses? Roberts stood, looking flustered. We'll need to review our witness list overnight, Your Honor. Judge Keller raised an eyebrow. I see. Mr. Wilkins, will you be presenting witnesses of your own? Yes, Your Honor, Marcus replied confidently. Several, in fact. Outside the courtroom, a small crowd gathered around Marcus. Diana from across the street hugged him. Tightly. You were amazing in there, she exclaimed. The way you showed them those garden photos. Their faces. Mr. Chen, who owned the corner grocery, shook Marcus's hand vigorously. Very smart, he said. I close shop tomorrow to come back and watch. Zoe, the reporter, approached, with her notebook open. Mr. Wilkins, your legal knowledge seems extensive for someone without formal training. Would you care to comment on that? Before Marcus could answer, Mrs. Talbot stepped in. Mr. Wilkins has no comment at this time. He needs to prepare for tomorrow. As they walked toward the parking lot, Marcus spotted Roberts and his legal team huddled in intense conversation. They looked worried, occasionally glancing in his direction. They're regrouping, Mrs. Talbot observed. They didn't expect you to put up such a fight. Tomorrow will be harder, Marcus warned. They won't underestimate me again. On the drive home, Marcus was quiet, reviewing the day's events in his mind. He'd done better than expected, but winning against Westfield would still be an uphill battle, especially with Judge Keller's apparent connection to their CEO. Penny, for your thoughts? Mrs. Talbot asked, as they turned onto their street. Just wondering if I should have taken that settlement offer, Marcus admitted. It would have been easier, Mrs. Talbot snorted. Easier, maybe. But right? No. And the Marcus Wilkins I know doesn't take the easy way when it's not the right way. As they pulled up to his house, Marcus was surprised to see several people waiting on his porch. Diana and her kids, the Johnson family, Mr. Chen, and a few other neighbors. They were carrying casserole dishes, paper bags, and what looked like a homemade banner. What's all this? Marcus asked as he got out of the car. Diana stepped forward. Dinner for our neighborhood hero, she said with a smile. And we thought maybe we could help you prepare for tomorrow. I used to work as a receptionist at a law firm before my kids were born. Mr. Chen held up a large bag. I bring coffee and snacks. Might be a long night, yes? Marcus looked at the small crowd of neighbors, each offering what they could to help him fight for their community. Something warm spread through his chest, pushing away the doubt and fatigue. I don't know what to say, he managed finally. Don't say anything, Mrs. Talbot said, taking his arm. Just accept the help. That's what community is for. Inside, Marcus's small living room transformed into an impromptu war room. Diana organized witness statements while her teenage daughter typed up Marcus's handwritten notes. Mr. Johnson, who worked in construction, offered testimony about property values and housing quality. Mrs. Talbot directed everything from Marcus's Armchair like a general. Late into the evening, as neighbors shared stories and strategies, a young law student named Aisha, who lived in the apartment building down the street, approached Marcus. "I saw you in court today," she said quietly. "I'm a third-year student at City Law School. What you did in there, they don't teach that." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "The way you made complicated law simple. The way you connected real people to legal principles." She smiled. "Most of my professors just drone on about precedents and statutes, but you showed why the law matters in real life." "I'm just trying to save my home," Marcus said modestly. Aisha shook her head. "You're doing more than that. You're fighting for this whole community." She hesitated. "If you want some help with research for tomorrow, I'd be honored to assist." By midnight, most of the neighbors had gone home, but Marcus's case was stronger than ever. He had witness testimonies, precedent cases, and a clear strategy for the next day. As he finally prepared for bed, exhausted but hopeful, Marcus looked out his window at the quiet street. These modest houses and small yards might not look like much to Westfield development, but they were home to real people with real lives, people who were now standing together. Tomorrow, he would make sure Judge Keller and Westfield understood exactly what they were trying to destroy. Not just property, but a community. Marcus woke before dawn, his mind already racing with plans for the day ahead. The house was quiet after the bustling activity of the night before. He made coffee and stepped outside to check on his garden in the early morning light. The vegetables stood in neat rows, flowers bloomed along the borders, and the old shade tree spread its branches protectively over everything. This small patch of earth was worth fighting for, not just for himself, but for everyone who found peace and purpose here. By the time Mrs. Talbot arrived to drive him to court, Marcus was dressed and ready, his materials organized in a new briefcase that Mr. Chen had insisted on giving him. "More professional," Mr. Chen had said firmly. "You look different today," Mrs. Talbot observed as they drove. "More confident." Marcus nodded. "Yesterday, I was defending myself. Today, I'm defending all of us." When they arrived at the courthouse, Marcus was shocked to see the crowd gathered on the steps. At least 30 people from his neighborhood were there, many wearing matching green t-shirts with "Community Matters" printed across the front. Diana rushed over to hand shirts to Marcus and Mrs. Talbot. "My cousin works at the print shop," she explained. "He made these overnight." Marcus put the shirt on over his dress shirt, but under his suit jacket. The splash of green was visible at his collar like a statement. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Judge Keller looked startled when he entered and saw the crowd. His eyes narrowed at the green shirts, and he leaned over to whisper something to his clerk. "Quite a turnout today," he remarked dryly. "I remind everyone that this is a court of law, not a sporting event. I expect complete silence and proper decorum." The Westfield legal team appeared tense. There were now 4 lawyers at their table, instead of 3. Roberts kept glancing back at the crowded spectators section with a frown. "Counselor Roberts, you may call your next witness," Judge Keller said. Roberts stood. "Your Honor, Westfield would like to call Dr. Leonard Price, Urban Development Specialist." A distinguished-looking man with silver hair took the stand. His credentials were impressive: multiple degrees, books published, advisory positions on government committees. "Dr. Price," Roberts began, "could you explain to the court why urban renewal projects like Westfield's are necessary for the economic health of cities?" Dr. Price launched into a polished explanation about property tax revenues, urban decay, and economic revitalization. His vocabulary was technical and his manner authoritative. And what typically happens to neighborhoods like Mr. Wilkins's without such development? Roberts asked. They continue to decline, Dr. Price answered confidently. Property values fall, crime increases, and eventually they become truly blighted areas that cost the city more in services than they generate in taxes. For 20 minutes, Dr. Price painted a grim picture of what would happen without Westfield's intervention. When Roberts finished his questioning, he looked smugly at Marcus. "Your witness, Mr. Wilkins." Marcus approached the stand slowly, considering his approach. Dr. Price's testimony had been persuasive. Attacking his credentials would be pointless. "Dr. Price, thank you for your testimony," Marcus began politely. "I just have a few questions. First, have you personally visited my neighborhood?" "No, I've reviewed demographic and economic data only." "I see. So you haven't met any of the residents or seen how they live?" "That's not necessary for my analysis." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "In your expert opinion, what makes a neighborhood healthy?" "Economic indicators primarily. Property, values, tax revenue, business activity, employment rates. What about community connections? Neighbors who check on elderly residents during heat waves? Children who have safe places to play? Families who have lived there for generations?" Dr. Price shifted uncomfortably. "Those are social factors, not economic ones. But aren't they important to the people who actually live there?" "Of course, but they're difficult to quantify in development planning." Marcus walked to the gallery and gestured to the green-shirted spectators. "These are my neighbors, Dr. Price. Real people with real lives. When you talk about urban renewal, you're talking about displacing them from their homes." "Objection," Roberts called. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Keller said. "Mr. Wilkins, please stick to questions for the witness." Marcus turned back to Dr. Price. "In your studies of urban development, what happens to low-income residents after their neighborhoods are renewed?" "Many relocate to more affordable areas." "You mean they're forced to move away from their jobs, schools, churches, and support networks?" "Objection!" Roberts stood again. "Mr. Wilkins is testifying, not questioning." "I'll rephrase," Marcus said calmly. "Dr. Price, does your economic analysis include the costs to residents who are displaced? Costs like longer commutes, changing schools, or losing community support?" Dr. Price hesitated. "Those factors are difficult to quantify economically. Just because something is hard to measure doesn't mean it doesn't matter, does it?" By the time Marcus finished his cross-examination, Dr. Price's testimony seemed cold and one-sided. The economic benefits he'd described came at a human cost he hadn't considered. After a brief recess, Roberts called his next witness, a police lieutenant named Officer Garcia, who testified about crime rates in the neighborhood. "We've seen an uptick in property crimes, vandalism, and drug activity in this area over the past 2 years," Officer Garcia stated. "New development typically reduces these issues through better lighting, security systems, and a different demographic profile." During cross-examination, Marcus asked, "Officer Garcia, when did Westfield begin buying properties in my neighborhood?" "I believe about 2 years ago." "The same time period when you say crime began to increase?" Officer Garcia looked uncomfortable. "Yes, but correlation doesn't prove causation." Marcus nodded. "Of course. But you mentioned vandalism specifically. Has my property experienced any vandalism reports in the past year?" "Yes, several incidents." "And were any arrests made in those cases?" "No, insufficient evidence." "Did any of the vandalism occur after I refused Westfield's offers to buy my property?" "Objection!" Roberts nearly shouted. "Mr. Wilkins is implying Westfield was involved in criminal activity with absolutely no evidence. I'm simply asking about the timing, Marcus said innocently. Judge Keller frowned. I'll allow the question, but tread carefully, Mr. Wilkins. Officer Garcia admitted that yes, the vandalism had started after Marcus declined to sell. Marcus then showed police reports where similar vandalism had occurred at other properties whose owners initially refused Westfield's offers. The pattern was clear without Marcus having to state it directly. When residents wouldn't sell, problems suddenly began. During the lunch break, the courthouse steps became an impromptu community gathering. Diana had brought sandwiches for everyone. Children played on the grassy area nearby. Reporters, now from several news outlets, took photos and interviewed residents. How does it feel to see your neighbors supporting Mr. Wilkins? Zoe asked Mrs. Talbot. It feels like community, Mrs. Talbot replied simply. Something those Westfield people wouldn't understand if it bit them on their designer-suited behinds. Marcus laughed at Mrs. Talbot's comment, feeling more relaxed than he had in days. Aisha, the law student, sat beside him, reviewing notes. You're doing great, she told him. The way you humanize the issues against Dr. Price's testimony was brilliant. Just telling the truth, Marcus said. That's why it's working, Aisha replied. You're making this case about people, not just property lines. When court resumed, Roberts looked irritated by the community atmosphere that had developed. He called his final witness, an environmental consultant who claimed Marcus's garden might contain non-native species that could potentially disrupt the local ecosystem. It was a weak argument, and Marcus easily countered it by presenting the garden's planting records showing only native and food-producing plants. He even had Mrs. Talbot testify about the butterflies and birds that had returned to the neighborhood since the garden was established. No further questions, Marcus said, after Mrs. Talbot's warm, grandmotherly testimony had clearly charmed everyone in the courtroom, possibly even Judge Keller, who had actually smiled at her description of teaching her grandchildren to identify butterfly species. As Westfield concluded its case, Judge Keller turned to Marcus. Mr. Wilkins, you may begin presenting your defense tomorrow morning. Outside the courtroom, Roberts approached Marcus. The lawyer's confident demeanor had faded considerably. Mr. Wilkins, could we speak privately? He asked, eyeing the crowd of supporters nearby. Marcus nodded and stepped aside with Roberts. Westfield is prepared to make a new offer, Roberts said quietly. They'll drop the lawsuit entirely and pay for any damages to your property if you'll agree to certain landscaping modifications and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What kind of modifications? Just some adjustments to meet community standards, nothing that would substantially change your garden. And the non-disclosure agreement? Roberts looked uncomfortable. It would prevent you from discussing this case or any aspects of Westfield's development plans with the media or other residents. Marcus glanced at his neighbors, people who had become a real community, partly because of his garden and his stand against Westfield. I appreciate the offer, counselor, he said, but I'll have to decline. Roberts frowned. Mr. Wilkins, you've made your point. You've embarrassed Westfield enough. Take the win and walk away. This isn't about winning or embarrassing anyone, Marcus replied. It's about doing what's right for my community. As Roberts walked away, clearly frustrated, Mrs. Talbot approached. What did he want? She asked suspiciously. They offered to drop the case if I'd keep quiet about it. Mrs. Talbot snorted. As if you could be bought off that easily. Marcus watched as his neighbors chatted excitedly on the courthouse steps. Children, playing tag between the adults. Tomorrow, these people would tell their stories in court. the real human impact of what companies like Westfield were doing to communities like theirs. Judge Keller and Westfield were about to learn that they weren't just fighting one stubborn veteran with a garden. They were fighting a community that had found its voice. That evening, Marcus's living room once again became a strategy center. Aisha had brought printouts of Westfield's previous court cases, and the group was looking for patterns. "Look at this," Aisha said, spreading papers across the coffee table. In the last 3 years, Westfield has filed similar lawsuits against 12 property owners. All of them ended with settlements that included non-disclosure agreements. "So, nobody could talk about what happened," Marcus observed. "Exactly," Aisha nodded. "And look at who the targets were. 4 elderly residents, 3 single parents, 2 veterans including you, and 3 immigrants with limited English." Mrs. Talbot's eyes narrowed. People less likely to fight back or have resources for a legal battle. People they thought would be easy to push around, Diana added angrily. Marcus studied the documents. "Can we contact any of these people? Get statements about what happened?" Aisha looked uncertain. "They signed NDAs. They could get in trouble if they talk." "Maybe not," Marcus said thoughtfully. "If we could show the NDAs were part of a pattern of predatory behavior, a court might find them unenforceable." He turned to Aisha. "Can you look into that tomorrow? See if there's precedent?" While the others continued searching for patterns, Marcus stepped outside for some air. The night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. He walked around to his garden, checking the vegetables and flowers by moonlight. Everything looked peaceful. Then he noticed something odd. A dark sedan parked down the street. Engine off, but clearly occupied. As Marcus watched, someone in the car took a photograph, the flash briefly illuminating the interior. Marcus walked toward the car, but it started up and drove away quickly. He couldn't see the license plate in the darkness. Back inside, he mentioned the strange car. "Westfield's probably got someone watching you," Mrs. Talbot said worriedly. "They're getting desperate." "Should we call the police?" Diana asked. Marcus shook his head. "They're not doing anything illegal by sitting on a public street, but everyone should be careful going home tonight." The next morning, Marcus found his garden had been vandalized again. Several plants had been torn up, and the water system damaged. He took photos for evidence, then spent an hour making repairs before heading to court. "We need to file a police report," Mrs. Talbot insisted when she saw the damage. "After court?" Marcus said. "We can't be late today." The courthouse was even more crowded than the previous day. News of the case had spread, and people from other neighborhoods facing similar development pressures had come to watch. The green Community Matters shirts were everywhere. Judge Keller entered, looking tired and irritated. He glared at the crowded gallery before turning to Marcus. "Mr. Wilkins, you may present your case." Marcus called his first witness, Mrs. Talbot. She settled into the witness chair with dignity, her silver hair neatly styled, wearing her Community Matters shirt under a cardigan. "Mrs. Talbot, how long have you lived in the neighborhood?" Marcus asked. 52 years, she replied proudly. "Moved in when my husband and I got married. Raised our 3 children there." "And what changes have you seen since Westfield began? Buying properties?" Mrs. Talbot described how the tight-knit community had begun to unravel as neighbors were pressured to sell and move away. She explained how Marcus's garden had become a gathering place that helped hold things together. "That garden feeds people," she said firmly. "Not just food for the body, but food for the soul. Children learn where vegetables come from. Seniors like me have somewhere to sit in the shade and feel useful helping out. It matters." During cross-examination, Roberts tried to suggest Mrs. Talbot was exaggerating the garden's importance. "Isn't it just a hobby for Mr. Wilkins?" he asked dismissively. Mrs. Talbot fixed him with a stern look. "Young man, when you've lived somewhere for half a century, you learn what matters. That garden matters." Marcus's next witnesses included Diana, who testified about how vegetables from the garden helped feed her children when money was tight. Mr. Chen, who described how community connections helped small businesses survive, and several children, who talked about learning to grow food in Marcus's garden. After lunch, a surprising witness arrived, an elderly man named Walter Jenkins, who needed a walker to reach the witness stand. "Mr. Jenkins, where do you live?" Marcus asked. "I used to live at 487 Maple Street, just 6 blocks from Mr. Wilkins. My wife and I were there for 43 years. And where do you live now?" "Sunny Pines Retirement Center, about 20 miles. Out of town." The old man's voice cracked. "Away from everything and everyone I know. What caused you to move?" "Westfield Development sued us over a property line dispute, just like they're doing to you. Said our garage encroached on their land by 14 inches. We couldn't afford to fight it." Roberts jumped to his feet. "Objection! Mr. Jenkins signed a non-disclosure agreement with Westfield. This testimony violates that agreement." "Your Honor," Marcus countered, "Mr. Jenkins is not disclosing the terms of his settlement. He's simply stating public facts about a lawsuit that appears in court records." Judge Keller seemed torn. "I'll allow it for now, but be careful, Mr. Wilkins." Marcus had Walter describe how Westfield had used the threat of costly legal action to force him and his wife to sell their home at below market value. "Were there others like you, Mr. Jenkins?" Marcus asked. "Oh yes. Most of my old neighbors are gone now, scattered all over. Our community just disappeared." By the end of Walter's testimony, several people in the gallery were wiping away tears. Even Judge Keller looked uncomfortable. During the afternoon break, a woman Marcus didn't recognize approached him in the hallway. She was expensively dressed and spoke quietly. "Mr. Wilkins, I represent some concerned parties who would like this matter resolved quickly. If you drop this case today, there's a substantial cash payment available to you." She named a figure that made Marcus's eyes widen. "Just walk away. Buy a nicer house somewhere else." "Who are you?" Marcus asked, suspicious. "Someone who can make your life easier," she replied with a practiced smile. "Or much more difficult, depending on your choice." Before Marcus could respond, Aisha appeared at his side. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, eyeing the woman warily. The woman handed Marcus a business card. "Think about it. The offer expires at 5 o'clock today." She walked away briskly. "What was that about?" Aisha asked. Marcus showed her the card, which had only a phone number, no name. "A bribe, I think. Or a threat. Maybe both." Back in court, Marcus called his final witness of the day, a land use expert who contradicted Westfield's property line claims with historical maps and surveys. The expert's testimony was technical but clear, and by the end, Westfield's case seemed significantly weaker. As court adjourned for the day, Marcus noticed Judge Keller studying him with an unreadable expression. The judge's initial mockery had been replaced by what looked almost like respect, though he clearly still favored Westfield's side. Outside, as the community gathered on the courthouse steps, Marcus spotted Roberts having an intense conversation with someone in a nearby car, the same dark sedan he'd seen outside his house. "Aisha," he said quietly, "can you take a photo of that car? Try to get the license plate." She casually raised her phone as if taking a selfie with the courthouse. In the background, capturing the car in the process. Later that evening, Aisha called Marcus with surprising news. That car is registered to Maxwell Security, a private firm owned by a subsidiary of Westfield Development, she reported. And I found something else. 3 of the previous homeowners who settled with Westfield reported vandalism or break-ins before they agreed to sell. Just like what's been happening to me, Marcus said grimly. There's more, Aisha continued. I looked into those NDAs like you asked. There's a legal principle that non-disclosure agreements can't be used to conceal patterns of predatory business practices. If we can show Westfield has been targeting vulnerable homeowners systematically, those NDAs might be invalidated. That would let those people testify about what really happened, Marcus realized. Exactly. But we'd need more evidence to convince a judge to invalidate the agreements. After hanging up, Marcus sat at his kitchen table surrounded by case files and witness statements. The pieces were starting to come together. Westfield wasn't just after his property. They were following a playbook they'd used many times before, targeting those least able to fight back. Through his window, Marcus noticed the dark sedan had returned, parked across the street. This time, he grabbed his phone and walked outside, openly taking pictures of the car. After a moment, it drove away quickly. Back inside, Marcus called Mrs. Talbot to warn her about the suspicious car. While they were talking, he heard a crash from the backyard. I need to go, he said quickly, hanging up. Grabbing a flashlight, Marcus rushed outside to find 2 figures running away from his garden. Several more plants had been destroyed, and someone had spray-painted "Sell" across his garden fence. As Marcus surveyed the damage, his phone rang. It was the mystery woman from the courthouse. That was just a taste, Mr. Wilkins, she said coldly. Take the offer while it's still available. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. Tell your bosses they picked the wrong person to intimidate. I've faced worse than garden vandals. This isn't a game, the woman warned. People get hurt in development disputes like this. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. Be smart, Mr. Wilkins. Take the money. After she hung up, Marcus called the police to report both the vandalism and the threatening call. While waiting for officers to arrive, he noticed something the vandals had dropped, a company ID badge for Maxwell Security. The plot was thickening and the stakes were getting higher, but so was Marcus's determination to expose what Westfield was really doing to his community. The police officers who responded to Marcus's call seemed unimpressed by the vandalism. They took photos, wrote a report, and advised him to install security cameras. When Marcus showed them the Maxwell Security ID badge, they merely said they would look into it with little enthusiasm. Don't expect much, one officer said quietly, as they were leaving. Maxwell has connections at the department. After they left, Marcus called Aisha and explained what had happened. We need to be careful, she warned. If Westfield is willing to vandalize your property, they might do worse, all. The more reason to stop them, Marcus replied. Can you come over early tomorrow? I want to review something before court. I'll be there at 6, Aisha promised. Marcus barely slept that night. Every noise made him wonder if the vandals had returned. He found himself checking the garden repeatedly, flashlight in hand. By morning, his eyes were red from exhaustion, but his resolve remained strong. Aisha arrived as promised, carrying a thick legal reference book. Together, they reviewed cases where judges had invalidated non-disclosure agreements that concealed illegal activities. It was a long shot, but it might work if they could prove Westfield was engaging in systematic intimidation. Mrs. Talbot picked them up in her Buick at 7:30, fussing over Marcus's tired appearance. You need to take care of yourself, she scolded. You can't fight Westfield if you collapse from exhaustion. At the courthouse, They met with Walter Jenkins and two other former homeowners who had settled with Westfield. Despite the non-disclosure agreements, they were willing to testify about the pattern of harassment they had experienced. "I'm scared," admitted Eleanor Diaz, a retired teacher. "But I'm more scared of what happens if nobody stands up to these people." Court began with Judge Keller looking more serious than usual. News vans were parked outside, and reporters filled the back row of the courtroom. The case was becoming a local sensation. "Mr. Wilkins, please call your next witness," Judge Keller instructed. "Your Honor, before I do, I'd like to make a motion regarding witness testimony," Marcus said, holding the legal reference book Aisha had brought. "I have evidence that Westfield Development has engaged in a pattern of predatory practices against vulnerable homeowners and has used non-disclosure agreements to conceal these activities." Roberts was immediately on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This is completely irrelevant to the property line dispute before the court." "It is relevant," Marcus countered, "because it establishes a pattern of behavior that directly relates to their claim against my property. I ask the court to invalidate the non-disclosure agreements so these witnesses may testify freely." Judge Keller frowned, clearly torn. After a moment's consideration, he said, "I'll hear your evidence for this motion in my chambers, with counsel present." In the judge's chambers, Marcus presented the Maxwell Security ID badge, police reports of vandalism, and statements from Walter Jenkins and the other former homeowners describing similar experiences. He explained the legal principle that NDAs couldn't be used to hide illegal activities. "This is absurd," Roberts protested. "These are standard confidentiality agreements in property settlements. Mr. Wilkins is fishing for anything to distract from the simple boundary dispute at hand." Judge Keller studied the evidence carefully. "Mr. Wilkins has raised concerning issues," he said finally. "However, I need more substantial evidence before invalidating legal agreements. The motion is denied for now, but you may recall Mr. Jenkins to testify about generally known facts without violating his NDA. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something." Back in the courtroom, Marcus called Walter Jenkins to the stand again. "Mr. Jenkins, without discussing any settlement terms, can you tell us if you experienced property vandalism before your dispute with Westfield?" "Yes," Walter replied firmly. "My garage was vandalized 3 times. Police reports were filed, but nothing came of them." "And did you ever see anyone watching your home?" "Objection, leading the witness," Roberts called. "Sustained," Judge Keller ruled. Marcus tried a different approach. "What other unusual events occurred during your dispute with Westfield?" This question allowed Walter to describe surveillance, mysterious phone calls, and other intimidation tactics similar to what Marcus was experiencing. Through careful questioning, Marcus established a pattern without explicitly violating the NDA. The morning progressed well, with Marcus building a convincing case about Westfield's methods. Judge Keller was listening attentively, occasionally asking his own questions that suggested he was taking the allegations seriously. During the lunch break, Marcus felt optimistic for the first time since the case began. His community supporters gathered on the courthouse steps, sharing food and stories. The media coverage was growing, with Zoe's articles being picked up by larger news outlets. "You're making a difference," Aisha told Marcus as they reviewed notes for the afternoon session. "People are paying attention." As Marcus headed back to the courtroom, his phone rang. It was a neighbor he hadn't heard from in days. "Marcus, there's smoke coming from your house," the neighbor shouted. "The fire department is already here, but it looks bad." Marcus felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath him. "My house? Are you sure?" "I'm looking at it right now." There's flames coming from the back, where your garden is." Marcus stood frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. Mrs. Talbot took the phone from his hand. "What's happening?" she asked, then gasped at the answer. "We'll be right there." "What is it?" Aisha asked, alarmed by their expressions. "Marcus's house is on fire," Mrs. Talbot said grimly. Marcus snapped back to awareness. "I have to go. Now." "But court reconvenes in 20 minutes, Aisha reminded him. "Tell Judge Keller there's been an emergency," Marcus said, already moving toward the exit. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Mrs. Talbot drove at alarming speed through the city streets. As they turned onto Marcus's block, they could see smoke billowing into the sky. 3 fire trucks were parked outside his house, with firefighters running hoses and shouting instructions. The back of the house, where Marcus kept all his case materials, was engulfed in flames. The garden was a charred mess of melted plastic irrigation pipes and burned plants. The old shade tree was singed but still standing. Marcus rushed toward the house, but a firefighter stopped him. "You can't go in there, sir." "It's my house." Marcus shouted, "My papers, my parents' photo, they're all inside." "We're doing everything we can," the firefighter assured him. "But it's not safe." Marcus watched helplessly as the firefighters battled the blaze. Neighbors gathered around, offering support and shelter. Diana hugged him tightly, her eyes filled with tears. "What happened?" Marcus asked the fire chief when the flames were finally under control. "Can't say for sure yet," the chief replied, wiping soot from his face. "Looks like it might have started in the back room where you had a lot of papers. Could have been electrical, but we'll investigate." 2 hours later, Marcus was allowed to enter what remained of his home. The front rooms had suffered mostly smoke and water damage, but his study and part of the kitchen were destroyed. Most of his case materials were gone, the carefully organized notes, the evidence folders, the witness statements. But worst of all, the photograph of his parents in front of the house, his most treasured possession, was damaged beyond repair. Marcus held the charred frame in his bandaged hands, his eyes burning with tears and smoke. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Talbot said softly, standing beside him in the ruined living room. Marcus looked around at the destruction. "This wasn't an accident," he said with quiet certainty. "You think Westfield did this?" Mrs. Talbot asked, though her tone suggested she already believed the same. "I can't prove it. Not yet." Marcus carefully set down the ruined photograph. "But I know." "What now?" Mrs. Talbot asked. "Most of your case materials are gone." Marcus checked his watch. Court had reconvened an hour ago. "Now we go back to court," he said firmly. "They think this will stop me. They've just given me more reason to fight." With bandaged hands from minor burns received while trying to save his parents' photo, Marcus returned to the courthouse. His clothes smelled of smoke, and exhaustion lined his face, but determination burned in his eyes. When he entered the courtroom, a hush fell over the crowd. Judge Keller looked genuinely shocked at Marcus's appearance. "Mr. Wilkins," the judge said, "we received word of the fire at your residence. Given the circumstances, I'm prepared to grant a continuance until you can." "Thank you, Your Honor," Marcus interrupted respectfully, "but I prefer to continue today." Judge Keller studied him for a moment, concern evident in his expression. For the first time, he addressed Marcus with genuine respect. "Very well, sir. Please proceed when you're ready." Roberts and the Westfield team watched with calculated interest as Marcus took his position. With many of his notes destroyed, Marcus would have to rely on memory and the few documents Aisha had in her possession. It was a significant setback, but as Marcus looked at the community members filling the gallery, people who had become like family to him. He knew he wouldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. The fire had destroyed his papers, damaged his home, and nearly taken his most precious mementos. But it had also burned away any doubt about what he was fighting for, and any restraint he might have felt about exposing Westfield's true nature. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion, "I'd like to recall Walter Jenkins to the stand." As Walter made his slow way to the witness box, Marcus quickly whispered to Aisha, "What documents do we still have?" She handed him a thin folder. "Just the copies I made of the pattern of cases and the property records from the county office. It wasn't much, but it would have to do." Marcus approached Walter with newfound determination. "Mr. Jenkins, you testified earlier about experiencing vandalism before your settlement with Westfield. Were you ever offered money to keep quiet about these incidents?" Before Walter could answer, Roberts jumped to his feet. "Objection! This violates the non-disclosure agreement." "Your Honor," Marcus countered, "I'm not asking about settlement terms. I'm asking about separate offers that may have been made outside any formal agreement." Judge Keller considered this distinction. "I'll allow it. The witness may answer." Walter nodded firmly. "Yes, I was approached by a woman who offered cash if I would stop making noise about the vandalism." "Did she identify who she worked for?" "No, but she gave me her card. It had just a phone number, no name." Marcus held up a business card. "Like this one?" Walter squinted at it, then nodded. "Exactly like that. Same fancy paper, same gold lettering." Marcus entered the card into evidence, explaining that the same woman had approached him with both bribes and threats. He then asked Walter about other former residents who had experienced similar tactics. By connecting these dots without directly violating the NDAs, Marcus was painting a clear picture of Westfield's methods. When Walter finished testifying, there was a murmur of concern throughout the courtroom. Next, Marcus called Diana to testify about the community impact of Westfield's actions. As she spoke eloquently about children losing friends when families were forced to move, Judge Keller appeared genuinely moved. During cross-examination, Roberts tried to suggest Diana was exaggerating the community bonds. "Isn't it true that neighborhoods change all the time?" he asked dismissively. "People move in and out. It's simply progress." Diana's eyes flashed. "There's a difference between natural change and being forced out because someone more powerful wants your home. That's not progress, sir." "That's wrong." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus felt his energy fading. The smoke inhalation and stress were taking their toll. Judge Keller noticed his faltering voice. "Mr. Wilkins, perhaps we should adjourn for today. You've been through a traumatic event." "Just one more witness, Your Honor," Marcus insisted. "I'd like to call Fire Chief Thomas Rodriguez." The fire chief had come directly from investigating Marcus's house. After being sworn in, he testified about his preliminary findings. The fire originated in the back room where Mr. Wilkins kept his case materials, Chief Rodriguez explained. "Initial indicators suggest it wasn't accidental." "What makes you say that?" Marcus asked. "We found traces of accelerant around the desk, where the papers were stored, and the back door lock had been tampered with." A shocked murmur ran through the courtroom. Roberts immediately objected. "This is pure speculation. There's no evidence connecting this unfortunate incident to my clients." "I haven't suggested who might be responsible," Marcus replied calmly. "I'm simply establishing facts." Judge Keller allowed the testimony to continue, his expression growing increasingly troubled as the fire chief described the targeted nature of the blaze, how it seemed specifically designed to destroy Marcus's legal materials while minimizing risk of the fire spreading to neighboring homes. In my 20 years as a firefighter, Chief Rodriguez concluded, I have rarely seen a fire so precisely targeted. When court finally adjourned for the day, Marcus was swaying with exhaustion. Mrs. Talbot and Aisha helped him down the courthouse steps to where reporters had gathered. Mr. Wilkins, do you believe Westfield was behind the fire? Zoe called out. No comment at this time, Marcus replied wearily. The investigation is ongoing. The community had arranged temporary housing for Marcus at Diana's sister's vacant apartment. When they arrived, Marcus found the small space filled with donated items, clothes, toiletries, food, and even framed photos of his garden that neighbors had taken over the years. People want to help, Diana explained simply. After everyone left, Marcus sat alone in the unfamiliar apartment, overwhelmed by the day's events. The full weight of his loss finally hit him. His home, his parents' photograph, his sanctuary. For the first time since the case began, he wondered if the fight was worth it. His phone rang, breaking the silence. It was a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Wilkins, said a male voice he'd never heard before. My name is James Turner. I'm a former Westfield employee who saw the news about your house. Marcus sat up straighter. What can I do for you, Mr. Turner? It's what I can do for you, Turner replied. I have information about how Westfield operates. Information they wouldn't want made public. Why would you help me? Marcus asked cautiously. Because what they did to you, they did to others. And I helped them do it before I understood what was really happening. Turner paused. I have documents, Mr. Wilkins, internal memos about their acquisition strategy for your neighborhood, including specific plans for your property. Marcus's exhaustion vanished. Can we meet? Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., the coffee shop on 3rd and Pine. Turner lowered his voice. Come alone, and don't tell anyone about this call. After hanging up, Marcus stared at the phone, unsure whether to trust the mysterious caller. It could be another Westfield trap. But if Turner was genuine, his information could be exactly what Marcus needed to expose Westfield's methods. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Aisha, carrying an armload of legal books. I thought we could rebuild some of your case materials, she said, setting the books on the table. I've found some precedents that might help with tomorrow's arguments. Marcus didn't mention Turner's call. Instead, he helped Aisha organize what little evidence they still had. As they worked, more neighbors arrived. Mrs. Talbot with dinner, Mr. Chen with office supplies, Diana's teenage son with his laptop to help research. By midnight, they had reconstructed a basic case file. It wasn't as thorough as what had been lost, but it was enough to continue. After everyone left, Marcus lay awake on the unfamiliar bed, thinking about Turner's call. Could he trust it? Did he have a choice? At 5 a.m., he rose quietly and dressed. He left a note for Mrs. Talbot, who was picking him up at 8:30, saying he'd gone for an early walk to clear his head. The coffee shop on 3rd and Pine was nearly empty when Marcus arrived at 6:45. He chose a table with a view of both the door and the street, ordered coffee, and waited. At exactly 7 a.m., a nervous-looking man in his 30s entered. He scanned the shop, spotted Marcus, and hurried over. Mr. Wilkins, he said quietly, sliding into the chair opposite. I'm James Turner. I appreciate you coming forward, Marcus said cautiously. What exactly do you have? Turner glanced around, then slid a thick envelope across the table. Internal strategy documents, emails between executives, a target list of properties they wanted. His voice dropped even lower. And communications with Judge Keller about your case. Marcus froze. Judge Keller? He's been communicating with... Westfield? About my case? Turner nodded grimly. He's an investor in Maxwell Partners, which partly owns Westfield. There's a clear conflict of interest he never disclosed. Marcus opened the envelope and quickly scanned the documents. If authentic, they were explosive, revealing not just predatory tactics against vulnerable homeowners, but potential judicial misconduct. "Why are you giving me these?" Marcus asked. Turner's eyes dropped. "I was the one who identified you as a target. Former military, living alone, modest income. On paper, you looked like someone who would cave under pressure." He looked up, meeting Marcus's gaze. "I was wrong. And when I saw what they did to your house..." He shook his head. "Some lines shouldn't be crossed." As Marcus left the coffee shop with the envelope safely tucked inside his jacket, he felt a strange mix of emotions: anger at the corruption, gratification at finally having solid evidence, and determination to use it effectively. This was the turning point. Now, he just had to figure out how to use these documents without jeopardizing his case or Turner's safety. Marcus arrived back at the apartment to find Mrs. Talbot waiting anxiously. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I've been worried sick. Court starts in an hour." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, not meeting her eyes. "I needed to clear my head." Mrs. Talbot studied his face. "You're hiding something. I can always tell when you're hiding something." Marcus hesitated, then decided to trust her. "I met with someone, a Westfield insider. He gave me documents that could change everything." He pulled the envelope from inside his jacket. Mrs. Talbot's eyes widened as Marcus spread the papers on the table. There were internal memos detailing Westfield's acquisition strategy, including phrases like "pressure tactics for resistant owners" and "create urgent conditions for sale." A target list ranked homeowners by vulnerability, with Marcus's name highlighted as "stubborn but isolated, increase pressure." Most damning were emails between Westfield's CEO, Richard Maxwell, and Judge Keller discussing an investment opportunity related to the development project, dated just weeks before Marcus's case began. "This is explosive," Mrs. Talbot whispered. "And potentially dangerous," Marcus added. "The man who gave me these is risking his career. Maybe more." "What will you do with them?" Marcus checked his watch. "I don't know yet. We need to get to court." As they drove to the courthouse, Marcus wrestled with his options. Revealing Judge Keller's conflict of interest would likely get the case reassigned to another judge. But would that help or hurt his chances? And how could he use the EB evidence without exposing Turner as the source? The courtroom was packed when they arrived. News of the fire had spread, and more reporters filled the back row. Marcus noticed that today, Judge Keller avoided looking directly at him. "Mr. Wilkins, are you prepared to continue your case?" "Judge," Keller asked, his voice formal. "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus replied, studying the judge's face. Now that he knew about Keller's connection to Westfield, he could see subtle signs of the man's discomfort. Marcus called his next witness, a surveyor who confirmed the boundary stakes Marcus had found were legitimate markers under state law. The testimony was strong, directly contradicting Westfield's property line claims. During the morning break, Aisha pulled Marcus aside. "Something weird is happening with the Westfield team," she whispered. "They keep getting texts, and Roberts looks really nervous." Marcus glanced over at the Westfield table. Roberts was indeed checking his phone repeatedly, his expression growing more concerned each time. "I think our friend might be making himself known," Marcus said quietly. When court resumed, Marcus called a city records clerk who testified that the historical documents Westfield claimed supported their property line argument weren't actually in the official records. It was another blow to Westfield's case. As the lunch break approached, Judge Keller seemed increasingly distracted. He checked his own phone during testimony and whispered with his clerk. "Court will recess until 2 p.m., he announced abruptly. In the courthouse cafeteria, Marcus sat with Mrs. Talbot, Aisha, and Diana, keeping the envelope of documents close. "I think I need to use these," he said in a low voice, tapping the envelope. "But I'm not sure how without putting Turner at risk." "What exactly do they show?" Aisha asked. "That Judge Keller has a financial interest in Westfield's development project, and that Westfield deliberately targets vulnerable homeowners with harassment and intimidation until they sell." Diana's eyes widened. "That would explain everything. That's been happening to you." "And to others before me," Marcus nodded. "The question is, how do I bring this to light without revealing my source?" Aisha thought for a moment. "You could ask for a private meeting in the judge's chambers to discuss a sensitive matter. Show him the evidence of his conflict of interest. He might recuse himself rather than face exposure." "And if he doesn't?" Mrs. Talbot asked. "Then I'll have to decide whether justice for our community is worth the risk to Turner," Marcus said grimly. When court resumed, Marcus noticed immediately that something had changed. Judge Keller looked pale and tense. The Westfield lawyers were huddled in urgent conversation, occasionally glancing toward Marcus with concerned expressions. "Before we continue," Judge Keller announced, "I'd like to see counsel in my chambers. Mr. Wilkins, as you're representing yourself, that includes you." In the judge's chambers, with the court reporter present, Judge Keller got straight to the point. "It has come to my attention that there may be a perception of conflict of interest in this case," he said stiffly. "While I maintain I can be impartial, to avoid any appearance of impropriety, I am recusing myself. The case will be reassigned to Judge Wilson, who can begin hearing it tomorrow morning." Roberts looked stunned. "Your Honor, is this really necessary? We're well into the proceedings already." "My decision is final, Counselor," Judge Keller said firmly, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m. in Courtroom 3. As Marcus left the chambers, he wondered what had prompted Judge Keller's sudden recusal. Had Turner contacted him directly? Or had Westfield, fearing exposure, pressured the judge to step aside? Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around. "Marcus, Mr. Wilkins, did you know about Judge Keller's connections to Westfield?" Zoe asked. Microphone extended. "No comment at this time," Marcus replied, surprised by the question. How had they learned about the connection so quickly? Back at the apartment, Marcus turned on the local news to find the answer. A breaking story announced that an anonymous source had provided documents to several news outlets revealing Judge Raymond Keller's investment in a company linked to Westfield Development. The Judicial Ethics Committee was launching an investigation. Marcus's phone rang. It was Turner, sounding anxious. "Did you release the documents to the media?" he demanded. "No," Marcus assured him. "I haven't shown them to anyone except my closest advisors. Did you?" "Not directly," Turner admitted. "I sent copies to the Ethics Committee and suggested they might want to investigate before the story broke publicly. I guess they weren't the only ones who got copies." "Are you safe?" Marcus asked. "For now. I've taken precautions." Turner paused. "There's something else you should know. Westfield is panicking. The board is pressuring Maxwell to settle your case quickly before more details emerge about their methods." "They should be worried," Marcus said. "What they've been doing isn't just unethical, some of it appears to be illegal." After hanging up, Marcus faced a difficult decision. The documents in his possession revealed far more than Judge Keller's conflict of interest. They showed a systematic strategy of intimidation, potentially including criminal acts like the vandalism and possibly even the fire at his home. Using this evidence might win his case, but it could also put Turner at risk of being identified as the whistleblower. Yet not using it might allow Westfield to continue targeting other vulnerable homeowners. Marcus spread the documents across the table, reading them more carefully. Some were clearly marked with Westfield letterhead, while others were printouts of emails. If he redacted certain information and presented only selected documents, perhaps he could protect Turner while still exposing Westfield's tactics. His phone rang again, another unknown number. "Mr. Wilkins," a woman's voice said. "This is Andrea Lewis, assistant to Richard Maxwell at Westfield Development. Mr. Maxwell would like to meet with you privately this evening to discuss a resolution to your case." Marcus was immediately suspicious. "Why would I agree to that?" "Mr. Maxwell is prepared to offer very generous terms," Andrea replied smoothly. "The meeting would be at a public restaurant of your choosing, completely above board." Marcus considered the offer. Meeting Maxwell face-to-face might give him insights he couldn't get any other way. "Tell Mr. Maxwell I'll meet him at Riverside Cafe at 7 p.m., Marcus said. "I'll be bringing my legal advisor." After hanging up, he called Aisha. "How would you like to have dinner with the CEO of Westfield Development?" 2 hours later, Marcus and Aisha sat at a corner table in Riverside Cafe, watching as Richard Maxwell entered. He was tall and expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of someone used to getting his way. A younger man followed him, clearly security, despite the business suit. "Mr. Wilkins," Maxwell said, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Marcus shook his hand briefly. "This is Aisha Johnson, my legal advisor." Maxwell nodded to Aisha, then got straight to business. "I'll be frank, Mr. Wilkins. This situation has escalated unnecessarily. Westfield is prepared to withdraw our claim to your property completely, cover all damages to your home from the unfortunate fire, and provide substantial compensation for your troubles." "In exchange for what?" Marcus asked. "A confidentiality agreement, naturally. What happens between us stays between us." "Another NDA," Marcus observed, "like the ones you had Walter Jenkins and the others sign." Maxwell's smile tightened. "Standard business practice. And what about the next homeowner you target? And the one after that?" "I'm offering you a very generous settlement, Mr. Wilkins," Maxwell said, his voice hardening. "I suggest you take it." Marcus reached into his jacket and placed a single document on the table. A copy of Westfield's target list, with vulnerable homeowners ranked by how easily they could be pressured to sell. "This doesn't look like standard business practice to me," Marcus said quietly. "It looks predatory, possibly criminal." Maxwell's face drained of color. He glanced at the document, then at his security man, who shifted uncomfortably. "Where did—" "You get that?" Maxwell demanded. "Does it matter? I have more, much more. Documents that show a pattern of deliberate harassment against homeowners who refuse to sell." Maxwell leaned forward, his voice low and threatening. "Be very careful, Mr. Wilkins. You don't know who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do," Marcus replied calmly. "You're someone who thought I'd be an easy target because I'm a disabled veteran living alone. You were wrong." Maxwell stared at him for a long moment, then stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. My lawyers will be in touch." As Maxwell stormed out, Aisha let out a breath she'd been holding. "That was intense. Do you think he'll retaliate?" "Probably," Marcus admitted. "But now he knows we have documentation of their methods. That changes the game." Later that night, as Marcus prepared his arguments for the new judge, he received an email from an anonymous address. It contained a single photo, Judge Keller golfing with Richard Maxwell at an exclusive country club, their arms around each other's shoulders in friendly camaraderie. Attached was a financial statement showing Keller's investment in Maxwell Partners, the company that partially owned Westfield Development. The sender's message was brief. More ammunition. Be careful how you use it. Marcus stared at the evidence of judicial corruption, feeling both vindicated and troubled. Using this information could help his case and potentially stop Westfield's predatory practices. But it might also destroy Judge Keller's career and possibly expose Turner as the source. Was exposing corruption justice or vengeance? Was protecting his home and community worth the potential cost to others? These were questions Marcus had never expected to face when this case began. Tomorrow, with a new judge, he would have to decide what kind of justice he was really fighting for. Marcus barely slept that night, weighing his options. By morning, he'd made his decision. He would fight Westfield with everything he had, but he would protect Turner's identity at all costs. Courtroom 3 was even more crowded than before. News of Judge Keller's recusal had drawn additional media attention, and there wasn't an empty seat to be found. Marcus noticed several attorneys from other firms watching with professional interest. Judge Wilson, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with short gray hair and piercing eyes, entered the courtroom promptly at 9 a.m. "As I'm new to this case," she began, "I've reviewed the transcripts from previous proceedings. However, given the circumstances of Judge Keller's recusal, I believe we should address some preliminary matters before continuing." She looked directly at Roberts. "Counsel for Westfield, I understand there may be questions about potential conflicts of interest. Do you wish to make any motions regarding this issue?" Roberts stood, looking uncomfortable. "No motions at this time, Your Honor." "Westfield is prepared to proceed." Judge Wilson raised an eyebrow, then turned to Marcus. "Mr. Wilkins?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I believe it's important to acknowledge why Judge Keller recused himself. Information has emerged suggesting a financial relationship between Judge Keller and Westfield Development." "Objection!" Roberts called out. "These are unproven allegations that have nothing to do with the property dispute before the court. On the contrary," Marcus countered, "they speak directly to patterns of conduct that are central to my defense. I believe Westfield has engaged in systematic efforts to pressure homeowners into selling, including potentially improper influence. With the court, Judge Wilson considered this. Mr. Wilkins, do you have evidence to support these serious allegations?" "I do, Your Honor." "Then I'd like to see counsel in my chambers. Court is in recess for 30 minutes. In Judge Wilson's chambers, with the court reporter present, Marcus presented carefully selected documents from Turner's packet. He had removed any information that might identify Turner as the source, focusing instead on the evidence of Westfield's tactics and Judge Keller's investment connections. Roberts objected strenuously. These documents, if authentic, were clearly obtained improperly. They should be excluded entirely. Whether they were obtained improperly is a separate issue from whether they're authentic, Judge Wilson noted. "Are you challenging their authenticity, Counselor?" Roberts hesitated. "We reserve the right to challenge specific contents, but no, not their general authenticity." Judge Wilson studied the documents carefully. "Mr. Wilkins, these are serious allegations that go beyond the scope of a simple property dispute. Have you shared this information with the proper authorities?" "Some of it has been provided to the Judicial Ethics Committee," Marcus admitted. "Other aspects are still being investigated." "I see." Judge Wilson thought for a moment. "Here's what we're going to do. I'll allow limited testimony regarding Westfield's general business practices as they relate directly to your property dispute. However, allegations about Judge Keller will be addressed in the appropriate ethics forum, not my courtroom. Back in the courtroom, Judge Wilson addressed the gallery. This court will focus on the property dispute before us. While I understand there are broader concerns, we will maintain that focus. As the day progressed, Marcus called several former homeowners who testified about Westfield's pressure tactics without violating their NDAs. He presented evidence of the systematic vandalism, carefully avoiding any mention of Turner or the internal documents. During cross-examination, Roberts tried to discredit each witness, suggesting they were bitter about legitimate business transactions. But their stories were consistent and compelling. After lunch, Roberts approached Marcus outside the courtroom. "This has gone far enough," he said quietly. "Westfield is prepared to make a final offer. They'll withdraw all claims to your property, pay for complete restoration of your home and garden, plus $100,000 in damages. And the NDA?" Marcus asked. "A limited confidentiality agreement covering only the settlement terms, not your experiences or allegations." Marcus was surprised by this concession. "I'll need to discuss this with my advisors." "You have 1 hour," Roberts said. "After that, we proceed with the case." In a small conference room, Marcus huddled with Mrs. Talbot, Aisha, and Diana. "It's a good offer," Aisha admitted. "Better than I expected." "They're scared," Mrs. Talbot observed. "All this publicity is hurting their other projects. They want this to go away." "What about the other homeowners?" Diana asked. "If you settle, what happens to them?" Marcus stared out the window at the community members gathered on the courthouse steps, still wearing their green shirts, still standing together. "That's the question, isn't it?" he said quietly. "Is this just about my house, or something bigger?" When court resumed, Marcus declined the settlement offer. Roberts looked genuinely shocked. "Your Honor," Marcus explained, "while I appreciate Westfield's offer, this case has revealed concerning patterns that affect more than just my property. I believe those issues deserve to be fully addressed in a public forum." Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "Very well. Proceed with your case, Mr. Wilkins." Marcus called his final witness, the fire inspector who had completed a thorough investigation of his house. "Based on your investigation," Marcus asked, "what caused the fire at my home?" "It was deliberately set," the inspector stated firmly. "Someone used accelerant on the papers in your study and rigged a delayed ignition device. And did you find any evidence regarding who might have done this?" "We recovered partial fingerprints and a cigarette butt with DNA that didn't match anyone living in the home. We're still waiting for matches from the database." Roberts objected repeatedly during this testimony, but Judge Wilson allowed it to continue. By the end of the day, the evidence of deliberate targeting and harassment was substantial. As court prepared to adjourn, Judge Wilson addressed both parties. "I've heard enough to make some preliminary determinations. Before I do, I'm going to give both sides one last opportunity to resolve this matter. I suggest you meet in courtroom 2, which is currently empty, and see if an agreement can be reached." The empty courtroom, Roberts started with a final attempt at settlement. "Mr. Wilkins, you've made your point. Take the offer and walk away." "It's not that simple anymore," Marcus replied. "This isn't just about my property. It's about how Westfield operates throughout the city." As they talked, the door opened. Richard Maxwell himself entered, flanked by 2 men in suits. "I'll take it from here, Roberts," Maxwell said dismissively. When they were alone except for the security men, Maxwell turned to Marcus. "You're becoming a serious problem, Mr. Wilkins," he said coldly. "I came to resolve this personally." "I'm listening," Marcus said. "Double the settlement offer, complete home restoration, and we'll establish a community development fund for your neighborhood, $1 million for improvements chosen by residents themselves." Maxwell leaned forward. "All you have to do is end this now." Marcus was genuinely surprised. "Why so generous suddenly?" Maxwell's expression hardened. "Between us? Because you're costing us money. Our investors are getting nervous. Projects in 3 other neighborhoods are facing new resistance because of your little crusade. So people are standing up for themselves now? People are being difficult because they think they can get more money," Maxwell snapped. "That's all this is about. Money. So, name your price, and let's end it." Marcus studied Maxwell's face, the frustration, the calculation, the complete lack of understanding about what really mattered. "It was never about money," Marcus said quietly. "It was about home, community, things you can't put a price on." "Everything has a price," Maxwell insisted. "Not everything," Marcus replied. "Not everyone." Before Maxwell could respond, the door opened again. A court officer appeared. "Judge Wilson would like to see all parties in her chambers immediately." In the judge's chambers, tension filled the air. Judge Wilson sat behind her desk, an official-looking document in front of her. "I've just received some significant new information," she said without preamble. "The police have made an arrest in connection with the fire at Mr. Wilkins's home." Marcus sat up straighter. "Who?" "A man named Eric Daniels, who works for Maxwell Security, a subsidiary of Westfield Development." Roberts looked stunned. Maxwell's face remained impassive. Furthermore, Judge Wilson continued, "Mr. Daniels has provided a statement claiming he was acting under orders from Westfield management." "That's preposterous," Maxwell said immediately. "If this man worked for a security contractor we use, he certainly wasn't authorized to commit arson. Westfield will cooperate fully with any investigation." Judge Wilson fixed Maxwell with a steady gaze. "I thought you might say that, which is why I find the timing of your settlement offers particularly interesting." She turned to Marcus. "Mr. Wilkins, given these developments, I'm prepared to rule on the property dispute immediately. However, I believe there are now serious criminal matters that extend beyond my courtroom." Marcus nodded, understanding what she meant. This had grown beyond a simple boundary dispute. It was now potentially a criminal case against Westfield itself. "I'm prepared to hear your ruling on the property matter, Your Honor," he said. "As for the rest, I trust the proper authorities will investigate thoroughly." Judge Wilson nodded approvingly. "Very well. Based on the evidence presented, particularly the boundary stakes dating to the 1952 Act, I find that the property line as currently marked is legally valid. Westfield's claim is denied." She turned to Maxwell and Roberts. "Furthermore, I'm ordering Westfield Development to pay for all damages to Mr. Wilkins's property resulting from this dispute, including complete restoration of his home and garden." Maxwell stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. We'll appeal immediately." "That is your right," Judge Wilson replied calmly. "However, given the new criminal allegations, I'm also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential racketeering, intimidation, and fraud charges." As they left the chambers, Marcus felt a strange mixture of emotions: vindication, relief, and a sense that something important had been accomplished not just for him, but for everyone who had been targeted by Westfield's tactics. In the hallway, reporters surrounded them immediately. Maxwell pushed through without comment, his face dark with anger. "Mr. Wilkins," Zoe called out, "does this ruling resolve your concerns about Westfield's development plans?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "It resolves my property dispute. But the bigger questions about how powerful companies treat vulnerable communities, those will take more than one court case to address. As Marcus stepped outside the IED courthouse, he found the entire community waiting, still in their green shirts. When they saw him, they erupted in cheers. The fight wasn't over. Maxwell's threat to appeal, the criminal investigation, the rebuilding of his home, all that still lay ahead. But today, at least, justice had prevailed, and Marcus wasn't fighting alone anymore. 6 months passed quickly. Spring turned to summer, and summer began yielding to fall. The neighborhood had changed, not in the way Westfield had planned, but in ways that mattered more to the people who actually lived there. Marcus stood in his rebuilt garden, watching neighborhood children harvest tomatoes and peppers. His house, now fully restored after the fire, looked better than before. The insurance company had initially tried to minimize the payout, but after the arsonist's confession and connection to Westfield, they'd covered everything without argument. "Mr. Marcus," called 8-year-old Lily, holding up an enormous tomato. "Look what I found." "That's a beauty," Marcus called back with a smile. "Put it in the basket for Mrs. Chen's sauce." The garden had expanded beyond Marcus's yard. Several vacant lots, once owned by Westfield but sold off as the company restructured after the scandal, had been converted into community garden space. Where one man had once grown vegetables, now dozens of families tended plots. Sharing knowledge, seeds, and harvests, Mrs. Talbot approached, carrying a pitcher of lemonade for the young gardeners. At 79, she moved a bit slower these days but remained the neighborhood's unofficial grandmother. "The Johnson boy is asking about planting pumpkins," she informed Marcus. "Says he wants to grow his own for Halloween." "It's a bit late in the season," Marcus replied, "but we could start some in containers. He might get small ones by October." As they watched the children working and playing among the plants, Mrs. Talbot shook her head in wonder. "Remember when all this started? Just you against those corporate sharks? Look at it now." Indeed, the changes went far beyond Marcus's property. The publicity from the case had sparked a citywide conversation about development practices. 3 other neighborhoods had formed community associations modeled after theirs. The city council had passed new regulations requiring community input on major development projects. And Westfield development had faced serious consequences. The criminal investigation had revealed a pattern of illegal practices, resulting in significant fines. Richard Maxwell had resigned under pressure, and the company's reputation had suffered badly. They still operated in the city, but with much greater caution and oversight. "I never expected any of this," Marcus admitted. "I just wanted to keep my house and garden." "Sometimes standing up for what's right has bigger effects than we can imagine," Mrs. Talbot observed. Marcus's phone rang, Aisha calling to remind him about their afternoon appointment. Since the trial, Aisha had finished law school and joined a small firm specializing in community advocacy. She still made time to help Marcus with his new project. "I'll be there," Marcus assured her. "Just finishing up with the kids." After the children had gone home with their vegetables, Marcus cleaned up and changed into a button-down shirt and slacks. His garden clothes weren't appropriate for business meetings. Mrs. Talbot drove him downtown, chatting the whole way about neighborhood gossip. She parked in front of a small office building where a new sign was being installed. "Community Legal Advocates." Inside, Aisha greeted them warmly. "The paperwork just came through," she announced excitedly. "The nonprofit status is officially approved." Marcus examined the documents with satisfaction. After the case ended, he had used part of the damages award to establish a legal assistance fund for homeowners facing predatory development practices. What had started as a small idea had grown. into a full nonprofit organization with Aisha as its lead attorney. 6 cases already, Aisha reported. Elderly homeowners in Riverside, a disabled veteran in Oakwood, immigrants in Pinecrest, all facing the same tactics Westfield used. We're helping them fight back. Any from Turner? Marcus asked quietly. James Turner had continued providing information anonymously after the trial, helping identify other developers using similar tactics. His identity remained protected. Only Marcus knew who he was. 2 tips this month, Aisha confirmed. Both solid leads. As they discussed upcoming cases, a familiar face appeared at the door, Judge Keller. After his recusal and the subsequent ethics investigation, he had taken early retirement from the bench. He looked older now, less confident. "Mr. Wilkins," he said formally, "may I speak with you privately?" Marcus nodded, leading the former judge to a small conference room. For a moment, neither man spoke. "I followed your community garden project in the news," Judge Keller finally said. "It's impressive work." "Thank you," Marcus replied neutrally. He had no animosity toward Keller anymore, but neither did he feel the need to make things comfortable for him. "After leaving the bench, I've had time to reflect," Keller continued. "My conduct in your case was inappropriate. I let personal connections affect my professional judgment." "Yes, you did," Marcus agreed simply. Keller nodded, accepting the blunt response. "I'm working with the Judicial Ethics Committee now. We're developing new training programs to help judges recognize and address implicit bias." Marcus studied the former judge with interest. "That sounds worthwhile." "It's not enough," Keller admitted. "But it's a start." He hesitated, then added, "I also wanted you to know that I've sold my interest in Maxwell Partners. I'm donating the proceeds to community development projects." "Why tell me this?" Marcus asked. "Because your case changed things. Changed me," Keller said honestly. "When I laughed at you that first day in court, I wasn't seeing you. I was seeing a stereotype. I was wrong, and I paid a professional price for that mistake. But I learned from it." After Keller left, Marcus rejoined Aisha and Mrs. Talbot, thoughtful. "He's trying to make amends," he told them, explaining the conversation. "Too little. Too late," Mrs. Talbot sniffed. "Maybe," Marcus said, "but change has to start somewhere." Later that afternoon, Marcus returned home to find an envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a letter from a family in another neighborhood facing a developer, using Westfield-like tactics. They had heard about Marcus's case and were asking for help. As Marcus read their story, he felt that familiar sense of purpose. One case had grown into something larger than he'd ever imagined, a movement to protect communities from corporate predators. His phone rang, Diana calling to remind him about the neighborhood council meeting that evening. Since the case, Marcus had become an unofficial advisor to neighborhood groups across the city. "I'll be there," he promised. "I'm bringing those resources we discussed." As he prepared for the meeting, Marcus noticed the frame on his wall. His law school diploma hung there after years in storage. Beside it was his reinstated law license, recently activated after decades of dormancy. He hadn't told anyone yet about his legal background. Not even Mrs. Talbot knew the full story. But it was time. The community deserved to know who had really been fighting for them all along. Tonight, at the council meeting, he would finally share his secret. He would explain why he had kept his legal training hidden, even during the trial. How letting them underestimate him had revealed their true character and prejudices. How sometimes justice required more than just knowing the law. It required changing how people saw each other. Marcus touched the diploma gently. His parents would have been proud to see how their son had used his education to protect their home and help their community. The phone rang again. Another family needing help with a development threat? Yes, Marcus said confidently. I can help with that. After ending the call, Marcus prepared for the neighborhood council meeting. Tonight would be special, not just for the community updates or the garden planning, but because he had finally decided to share his secret. The community center buzzed with activity when Marcus arrived. What had once been sparsely attended meetings now drew dozens of neighbors. People greeted Marcus warmly, many asking his advice on various matters. The green Community Matters t-shirts were still a common sight, now accompanied by garden aprons and canvas tote bags with the same logo. Diana called the meeting to order. First item, updates on the community garden expansion. Marcus reported on the new seedlings, the irrigation system improvements, and the children's education program. He loved seeing how something that began as his personal garden had grown into a neighborhood institution. Next, Diana continued, an update on development issues. As you know, Wilson Properties has approached several homeowners on Maple Street with purchase offers. Concerned murmurs spread through the room. Everyone remembered what had happened with Westfield. Unlike Westfield, Marcus reassured them, Wilson seems to be operating ethically so far. They're offering fair market value plus relocation assistance, and they've presented their development plans to the community for input. They're not using pressure tactics. But should people sell? Someone called out. That's a personal decision, Marcus replied. What matters is that people have accurate information, fair treatment, and real choices. That's what we're working to ensure through the community legal advocates. After the meeting's formal agenda concluded, Marcus asked to make a special announcement. The room quieted as he made his way to the front. Many of you have asked how I knew so much about the law during our fight with Westfield, he began. Some thought I was just a quick study. Others figured I'd watched too many courtroom dramas. Gentle laughter rippled through the room. The truth is, something I've kept to myself for a long time, Marcus continued. Before joining the Marines, I attended law school and passed the bar exam. Surprised whispers spread through the audience. Mrs. Talbot's mouth dropped open in astonishment. I never practiced law, Marcus explained. Right after graduation, 9/11 happened. Like many Americans, I felt called to serve. I enlisted in the Marines and put my legal career aside. He described his 20 years of military service, the injury that ended his career, and his return to his parents' home. When I came back with PTSD and a bad leg, I wasn't ready to be a lawyer. I needed peace and quiet. The garden became my therapy, my way of healing. Marcus paused, gathering his thoughts. When Westfield came after my property, I could have told the court about my legal background from the beginning. I could have shown my credentials and demanded respect. Why didn't you? Mrs. Talbot called out, still looking shocked. Because I wanted to see how the system really worked, Marcus answered honestly. Would justice depend on who I was or what I knew? Would a judge treat a disabled veteran with respect? Or would he assume I was ignorant because of how I looked? Hedayator met the eyes of his neighbors. You all saw the answer. Judge Keller laughed at me. Westfield's lawyers smirked. They thought I was an easy target because of what they saw. Not who I really was. Diana nodded slowly. So you let them underestimate you on purpose? Sometimes, Marcus said, letting people show their true colors tells you more than forcing them to hide behind polite facades. By not revealing my legal background, I exposed biases that might otherwise have remained hidden. He took a folded document from his pocket, his reinstated law license. I've kept this inactive for years. Now I've renewed it. Between this and our new nonprofit, we can help even more people facing situations like ours." The room erupted in applause. People crowded around Marcus, asking questions, offering congratulations. Mrs. Talbot pushed her way through, hands on her hips. "You mean to tell me," she said with mock outrage, "that all those nights I helped you organize your legal arguments, you already knew exactly what you were doing?" Marcus grinned. "I appreciated your help more than you know. And your company even more." Her stern expression melted into a smile. "You sneaky man. No wonder you handled that courtroom like you belonged there. You did." After the meeting, as twilight settled over the neighborhood, Marcus walked home with Mrs. Talbot. The streets felt different now. More alive, more connected. Neighbors chatted on porches. Children played in yards. Window boxes and small gardens brightened formerly plain houses. "So, counselor," Mrs. Talbot said, using his newly revealed title, "how does it feel to have your secret out?" "Surprisingly good," Marcus admitted. "I wasn't sure I'd ever practice law again, but now it feels right." "You were already doing it anyway," she pointed out, "just without the fancy title." When they reached Mrs. Talbot's house, she paused at her gate. "You know what still doesn't make sense? If you were a lawyer all along, why didn't you tell Judge Keller at the end? Even after you won, you kept it secret." Marcus considered the question. Would it have changed anything? Would knowing I had legal training make him respect me more? Or would it just have let him off the hook for his initial prejudice? "So it was about principle," Mrs. Talbot nodded. "It was about showing that justice shouldn't depend on titles or appearances," Marcus said. "Everyone deserves respect in a courtroom, lawyer or not." The next morning, Marcus received a letter from Judge Wilson, who had presided over the final days of his case. She was writing to invite him to speak at a judicial conference about community justice. "Your case has become something of a landmark." She wrote. "Many of us in the legal community have followed your subsequent work with great interest. We were impressed by your legal acumen during the trial. Now we understand why." Marcus smiled at the letter. News traveled fast. His phone rang. It was Aisha at the Community Legal Advocate's office. "You'll never believe who just walked in looking for help," she said excitedly. "James Turner himself. He's decided to come forward publicly about Westfield's practices. Says he's tired of hiding." "Tell him I'll be right there," Marcus replied. Before leaving, Marcus stepped into his garden for a moment of reflection. The old shade tree that had survived the fire spread its branches protectively over new growth. The garden beds were neat and productive, tended by many hands now instead of just his own. From this small patch of earth, something important had grown. Not just vegetables and flowers, but a community that had found its voice and its power. His parents had left him this house, never imagining what it would come to represent. He looked up at their bedroom window, where he'd hung a new print of their photograph. "I think you'd be proud," he whispered. As Marcus walked to his car, a young boy from down the street ran up to him. "Mr. Marcus, my mom says you're really a lawyer. Is that true?" Marcus smiled. "I am. But you know what? I'm a gardener too. And sometimes growing justice is a lot like growing tomatoes. It takes patience, care, and community." The boy looked confused by the comparison, but nodded anyway. "Can I still help in the garden, even though you're a lawyer now?" he asked. Marcus laughed. "Of course. I'll always be a gardener. Some things don't change just because people learn something new about you." As Marcus drove to meet Turner, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. When Judge Keller had laughed at him that first day in court, Marcus could never have imagined where it would lead. A restored home, a transformed neighborhood, a renewed purpose. Sometimes justice came from unexpected places. Sometimes the person others underestimated turned out to be exactly who they needed to fear most. And sometimes a small garden could grow into something that changed an entire community. A new sign greeted visitors at the entrance to the neighborhood. Community Matters. Below it, in smaller letters, Growing Justice Together. Marcus couldn't have said it better himself. That was the end of this story of Marcus Wilkins, a veteran who stunned a courtroom with his hidden legal talents while fighting for his home and community. Where are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about courage, justice, and standing up for what's right, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content like this. We share stories that not only entertain, but also spread awareness about important issues facing communities everywhere. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family. Together, we can spread kindness and awareness through the power of storytelling. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.